Hello, I'm Mark Heinzman and welcome to my channel. So Man of Steel is an epic mythological superhero film that is also an honest depiction of an alien god living amongst men, and the pressure, ramifications, and the weight of responsibility that comes with it. It's a film I quite like. I watched it during a very formative period in my life, so it made an impression of sorts. When it comes to Superman, I like the Zack Snyder version, the animated series version, and the classic Max Fleischer cartoons from the 1940s that you should definitely check out. But I feel as if I need to champion Man of Steel because, and I should forewarn you that I may sound a little combative for the next few minutes. I'm profoundly baffled and disgusted at how some people, namely film critics and some fans, have delegitimized this version of Superman by claiming that it's not quote unquote true to the character. Well, first of all, what is being true to the character? The character has existed for 80 plus years and has been interpreted in a variety of ways. What Zack Snyder is doing is no different than what any other filmmaker has done. His interpretation is as valid as any other. It's still recognizably Superman. Let me try to put this more succinctly. What if Man of Steel or Zack Snyder is not the problem? What if the problem is you? And if the internet and social media had been as advanced in the 90s or early 2000s, you would have said the same thing about Tim Burton's and Joel Schumacher's Batman, along with the Ang Lee Hulk movie from 2003. You seriously need to keep an open mind. Maybe take off your Disney glasses, let a filmmaker interpret a character how he or she sees it, and let them make a damn movie with it. And if you have your own interpretation of a character, then go out and create it. Attacks against a film of this magnitude made in a way that I consider authentically cinematic is something I consider profoundly offensive to my prospects as an individual filmmaker. And as I said in my Batman Forever video, if you can't analyze something fairly and objectively before you voice your opinion, you should seriously shut the hell up. But you know, as much as I may resent film critics, along with the matrix of film criticism, and what I would call consensus culture, I don't have it in my DNA to antagonize anyone. I will still pray for you. I always want cooler heads to prevail. Generally speaking, I'm just compelled to defend what I think is, by both fans and critics, misunderstood, misrepresented, and misinterpreted, and in some cases overlooked. Even if I'm not interested in something, I will still defend it in some way. Anyway, Man of Steel is a film that emphasizes just how alien Superman really is. The entire film is an odyssey of him understanding the human condition. As his Earth father, Jonathan Kent, says, quote, "You're not just anyone, Clark, and I have to believe that you were sent here for a reason. And even if it takes the rest of your life, you owe it to yourself to find out what that reason is." This is a version of Superman that exists in a reality that is bigger than ordinary life, bigger than Metropolis. He's a much more grandiose and mythological figure. As his Kryptonian father Jor-El says, quote, "What if a child dreams of becoming something other than what society had intended for him? What if a child aspired to something greater?" And his Earth mother Martha Kent, quote, "You were meant for greater things, and that when the day came, your shoulders would be able to bear the weight." That's why in the first act, when Clark is traveling around the world working various jobs, the aesthetic color palette is very desaturated and pedestrian. Clark is destined for a journey, a reality that is greater than that. It also looks very interstellar. I'm not referring to the Christopher Nolan film, by the way, because this is a world that Clark is very unfamiliar with. For him, traveling the Earth is the equivalent of traveling through space. However, the scene where Clark saves people from a burning oil rig is noticeably brighter. And it's by design, simply because something extraordinary is happening. Being Superman, even if he's not wearing the cape in this scene, brightens up his reality. Metropolis is also portrayed in an equally desaturated and pedestrian fashion. And after Superman foils Zod's plan to revive Krypton on Earth, it looks very interstellar. The devastation is meant to mirror the destruction of Krypton, Zod's personal devastation, as well as how alien Superman is. Metropolis is a city that he's hardly familiar with. We don't see him there until the third act. Krypton, on the other hand, is portrayed in a brighter, more decorative fashion. Smallville is always bright because it's Clark's adoptive home. It's what he's familiar with. His Earth family lives there. The Arctic, where the Kryptonian spacecraft has been located, is bright because Clark is getting closer to discovering his Kryptonian heritage. Kal-El, Clark Kent, first putting on his Superman suit and learning how to fly, which I really like, by the way, is a colorful scene because it's meant to reflect the brightness and the sense of wonder that Krypton, before it was destroyed, represented. He's become what he was destined for. He's discovered why he was sent here and what his purpose is. And when Superman reveals himself to the United States military, as he's floating above them, it's also a colorful scene because it's meant to convey how courageous and authoritative he is. But as he surrenders and is seated in the interrogation room with Lois Lane, it goes back to being desaturated and pedestrian. Because while Superman may be surrendering himself to mankind to ensure their safety, he's also surrendering to the mundanity of ordinary life and its limitations. That also explains why the scene of his father dying in the tornado and a young Clark being bullied and not being able to fight back looks that way. But when Superman goes back outside and into Zod's ship, it's back to being bright because, again, it reflects something extraordinary happening. It also highlights the contrast between Superman and Zod. Superman represents the altruistic and civilized side of Krypton, and Zod represents the barbaric and tragically maniacal side of it. And when the World Engine arrives in Metropolis, the city actually looks bright because it looks reminiscent of Krypton, which Zod is trying to revive. Likewise, when Superman fights, destroys the World Engine at the Indian Ocean, and reaches out to the sun after he does so, which is a great shot, by the way. It illustrates what Superman represents after saving the world. I previously mentioned that Man of Steel is an honest depiction of an alien god living amongst men. When Clark asked his father if he was not supposed to save the kids on the school bus that nearly drowned, Jonathan hesitates before mumbling, "Maybe." Jonathan doesn't know how to answer that question, let alone explain to Clark how alien he is. He says, and I really like this, by the way, quote, "When the world finds out what you can do, it's going to change everything. Our beliefs, our notions of what it means to be human, everything." Ultimately, Jonathan tells Clark that he has to choose, and whatever choice he makes, it's going to change the world. When Jonathan chooses to face death with dignity, similar to Kal-El's Kryptonian mother, in the tornado scene, he does so to ensure that Clark and his wife Martha are secure. He doesn't want them to be exposed or persecuted. And in a way, he's teaching Clark the importance of sacrifice. The way it's executed is by design. He becomes a mythological figure in his own way. Superman wants to help people, but he wants to do so quietly and discreetly. He says, quote, "I'm here to help, but it has to be on my own terms." He doesn't want to have to reveal or expose himself to society, institutions, or systems. He doesn't want his family or anyone he cares for to be put in potential harm's way. That's why he's conflicted about surrendering himself. But as Lois tells him, quote, "It's going to come out eventually. The only way you could disappear is to stop helping people altogether, and I sense that's not an option for you." Superman was going to rise to the occasion either way. He was just worried about the ramifications. But as Father Leon, the male priest at the local Smallville church, tells him, quote, "Sometimes you have to take a leap of faith first. The trust part comes later." And even if Clark is more assimilated to mankind by the end of the film, he's still fundamentally alien. He gets a job at the Daily Planet to, quote, "keep my ear to the ground." He elaborates, quote, "where people won't look twice when I want to go somewhere dangerous and start asking questions." The Daily Planet is a vehicle for him to advance his crusade as Superman. General Zod, played brilliantly by Michael Shannon, is a very maniacal villain with a hint of tragedy to him. I think this quote best sums him up when he says, quote, "I exist only to protect Krypton. That is the sole purpose for which I was born. And every action I take, no matter how violent or cruel, is for the greater good of my people. And now, I have no people." We can't sympathize with him because of how diabolical his intentions are, but there's a subtle tragedy to him that makes him understandable. he's a great villain. And when Superman kills him by snapping his neck, he feels terrible about it. He pleaded with him to stop, but he had no choice. He had to kill one of his own kind in order to save the world. Now, I have a theory that he feels more bad about slaying a Kryptonian than Zod himself. That's probably why in the subsequent scenes, we don't see him process his feelings any further. Those scenes happen days after the moment occurred. And he probably took the time to compartmentalize his feelings and think more pragmatically about the decision he made. He ultimately understood that Zod had to be stopped for the survival of Earth, for the survival of mankind. Now I'm going to break down what I specifically like about Man of Steel. Henry Cavill is a great Superman, Clark Kent, Kal-El. I think he has the presence of a 1940s movie star, and that of an authority figure from a 1950s TV show. I like, despite how alien he is, how classically American this Superman is. He's very evocative of, and I'm not saying this as a comic book purist, the Superman from the original comics of the 1930s and 40s. This line, quote, "I grew up in Kansas, General. I'm about as American as it gets. And subsequently, I'm here to help, but it has to be on my own terms," exemplifies that. Kevin Costner is great as Jonathan Kent. He's a classic movie star. Russell Crowe is great as Jor-El. You should check out A Beautiful Mind, which he stars in. I like how textured the Superman suit is. I think Man of Steel is very evocative of a 1950s alien invasion movie adapted into a more modern context. The shot of Lois spotting Clark on her camera during the Arctic scene and saying, "Where the hell are you going?" along with the scene where Clark and Martha walk outside their house at night, see Zod's ship from afar, to having the power suddenly go out in their house, with the TV signal being distorted, and walking back into the house as Zod delivers his "You are not alone" speech to the world, I think exemplifies that. I would say the opening sequences on Krypton are evocative of a 1930s sci-fi pulp serial likewise adapted into a more modern context. I like every scene between Clark and Martha. I like the dream sequence when Zod tries to persuade Superman to join him in his pursuit of paradise in the form of reviving Krypton on Earth. It's a powerful scene that vindicates whatever suspicions Superman had about Zod. I like when Superman aggressively bulldozes Zod to protect his mother. I know all of us would go to great lengths to protect our mothers. I like the fight scene in Smallville. It's just well choreographed. I think Man of Steel overall has the best action I've seen in a superhero film. Although the action in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films are pretty darn good too. Not to compare the two, of course. Different characters, different universes, different stories. But what really stands out for me, what really makes the movie for me, is the scene when Superman destroys the world engine. That's a moment that is just bigger than the screen, bigger than life. For one moment, I believe in Superman. A great man, a moral man. I like the soundtrack because it's epic, deterministic, and contemplative all at once. But what's really important for me is how Man of Steel emphasizes the influence that Clark, Kal-El's parents have on him. It makes him relatable or identifiable in a tangible and sophisticated way. He's admirable and human, exceptional dynamic. Anyway, I think I've made the case for Man of Steel. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again next time.